We're entering a moment where having money, designer items, or even a perfectly curated life is no longer enough to make someone feel aspirational. And you might already sense this without being able to name it, because somewhere along the way, the things that were supposed to signal success stopped evoking anything at all, even though they're still expensive, still exclusive, still technically impressive. What's happening isn't that luxury is disappearing, but that it's relocating and moving away from what can be bought instantly toward what has to be built slowly. And once you notice this shift, you start seeing it everywhere. In bodies that look lived in rather than engineered, in skill sets that reveal years of quiet discipline, and in lives that feel coherent rather than loud. And the reason this matters is because the next hierarchy won't be obvious. It won't be announced. And most people won't notice they've fallen out of it until it's already formed. I've been sitting with this idea for a while now, and I've been watching it take shape slowly, rather than arrive fully formed. And I've noticed my own reactions to things I once found aspirational have changed. Not because those things lost their objective value, but because they stopped evoking anything emotionally compelling in me. And I think that subtle emotional flatness is often the first sign that a cultural shift is already underway. This really began for me in moments of journaling, when I wasn't really trying to produce anything coherent or impressive. I was just letting my thoughts spill out honestly. And I noticed myself writing again and again about saturation, about excess, and about how visually loud the world feels, and how little of it actually feels meaningful anymore, especially when it comes to luxury and status. Because we now live in a time where access to other people's lives is constant, immediate, and unfiltered, where you can wake up and within minutes see how someone in another country eats their breakfast, structures their day, decorates their home, spends their money, dresses their body. And when all of that gets compressed into a single scrolling experience, the things that once relied on distance and mystique to feel powerful suddenly lose their charge. Luxury, historically, was not just about the price. It was about separation, about the fact that certain things were not to be seen by everyone, not understood by everyone, and not attained by everyone. And social media has quietly dismantled that separation, at least on a visual level, which means that even if access is still technically restricted, perception is not. And perception is where status actually lives. When something can be endlessly replicated visually, and when its image circulates more freely than its substance, it starts to function less like a marker of distinction and more like a shared costume, something people put on to signal belonging rather than elevation. And this is where so much of the fatigue comes from, because humans are deeply sensitive to when symbols stop meaning what they used to. The Birkin is such a clear example of this phenomenon, because for so long it represented not just wealth, but patience, proximity, cultural literacy, an entry into a very specific social ecosystem. And now it's reached a point of visual overexposure, where its presence alone doesn't tell you anything about the inner life, discipline, or depth of the person carrying it. Only that they understand what the symbol is supposed to communicate. And when symbols lose their explanatory power, the hierarchy doesn't disappear, it simply migrates, moving away from things that can be bought instantly toward the qualities that are revealed slowly over time, through consistency, restraint, and embodied knowledge. This is where I believe the new luxury is taking root. Not in a rejection of money or beauty or comfort, but in a recalibration of what these things actually mean when everyone has access to their surface level versions. Because money alone is no longer impressive in a world where spending can be copied, aestheticized, and simulated almost endlessly. What will become increasingly valuable are the things that money can support, but not replace. The things that still require effort, even when resources are abundant. And that's where discipline enters the conversation in a very central way. Discipline has become one of the rarest traits in modern life, not because people lack ambition, but because they're constantly being pulled in 1,000 different directions, rewarded for novelty, distracted by endless stimulation, and encouraged to equate motion with progress, which makes sustained focus feel almost rebellious. The new luxury will be rooted in this pairing of money and discipline. Because money can buy access, tools, time, and relief from certain stresses, but the discipline determines whether any of that access is actually transformed into something meaningful, lasting, or integrated into who you are. One of the clearest places this shift is already visible is how we relate to the body. We've reached a point where bodies can be altered, refined, and optimized with remarkable efficiency, where thinness, curves, youth, symmetry, even athletic appearance can be engineered externally, which for a time felt like liberation, like mastery over biology, but is now beginning to feel strangely empty. The body that will signal luxury going forward is not the body that will look maximally sculpted and aggressively perfected, but the body that looks regulated, capable, lived in, the kind of body that suggests routine rather than urgency and continuity rather than intervention. It's a body shaped by habits that are repeated quietly, by sports that require skill and endurance, and by movement that's integrated into daily life rather than pursued as a corrective measure. And that integration is something no amount of money can rush, because it requires you to show up consistently even when the results are not immediately visible. And this logic extends seamlessly into skill sets. We're surrounded by surface level competence, by people who know a little about a lot of things, who can reference trends without inhabiting them. And what's becoming rare again is depth, patience, and mastery that unfolds slowly. The new luxury will be having a niche interest that you didn't abandon when it stopped being exciting, something you stayed with through boredom, frustration, and plateaus, something you read about widely, practiced imperfectly, and refined privately, whether it's cooking, hosting, music, language, art, or any other craft that resists speed. What makes it luxurious is not how it looks on camera, but how much time it absorbs, how much attention it demands, and how deeply it shapes the way you move through the world. There's something inherently status signaling about depth in an age of distraction, because depth requires restraint, and restraint is increasingly rare in a culture that rewards immediacy, oversharing, and constant reinvention. Pace the pen becomes one of the most powerful forms of distinction. Taste is not about accumulation. It's about editing, about knowing when something doesn't need to be added, emphasized, or explained, and about having the confidence to let things remain understated. You can buy beautiful objects endlessly, but taste is knowing how to arrange them in a way that feels inevitable rather than forced, how to combine things so they speak to each other quietly, and how to stop before excess tips into noise. And this kind of discernment only develops through exposure paired with reflection, not consumption alone. Education will also reassert itself as a form of luxury, not necessarily in the form of degrees and credentials, but in the way someone thinks, the references they carry, and the connections they're able to make between seemingly unrelated ideas. And alongside this intellectual depth, there's this uncomfortable but undeniable truth that how you present yourself matters. Not in the sense of chasing perfection or fitting a narrow ideal, but in the sense that looking rested, nourished, and coherent communicates something about how you treat your body, your time, and your life. The new luxury appearance won't be about extremes, but about sustainability. About hair that looks strong because it's been cared for consistently rather than extended artificially, skin that reflects routine rather than intervention, and a general sense of physical regulation that comes from sleeping, eating, and moving in ways that support long-term health. Health itself is becoming one of the clearest markers of privilege, because real health requires stability, routine, access to quality food, time to rest, and the discipline to choose boring consistency over dramatic short-term results, all of which are increasingly difficult to maintain in a hyper-stimulated world. At the same time, we're seeing return to analog practices, not as nostalgia, but as a form of quiet resistance, a way of reintroducing friction into lives that have become too smooth, too optimized, too fast, and therefore too shallow. Reading physical books, writing by hand, cooking from scratch, learning instruments, walking without headphones, all of these practices feel luxurious now because they slow time down. They demand presence, and they cannot be multitasked or rushed without losing their essence. What's interesting is that even when people return to these offline practices, they still feel compelled to document them online. Not necessarily for validation, but as a way of signaling something subtler, which is the ability to commit to something consistently, even when it doesn't immediately pay off. The message becomes, I do this when no one's watching, and I've been doing it long enough that it's become a part of who I am. And that kind of quiet consistency is far more difficult to fake than any aesthetic. True effortlessness is then no longer about ease or natural talent, but about effort that has been absorbed into identity. It's about effort that no longer feels heavy because it's no longer optional. And that is something money can support, but never replace. So when I think about what luxury will mean this year and beyond, I don't think about objects, trends, or brands, but about lives that feel internally coherent. Because in a world where almost anything can be bought, the only things that will continue to signal distinction are the ones that still require time, consistency, restraint, and the willingness to become rather than acquire. If you're more interested in who you're becoming than what you're acquiring, this channel is for you. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.